Back when I was a kid, hiking and camping were practically second nature, especially on family trips. But everything changed after I moved to San Francisco in 1989 to start college. I quickly discovered that finding reliable hiking companions wasn't nearly as easy as I'd hoped. Don't get me wrong, I did meet a few people I really clicked with. Some of them I stayed in touch with long after graduation. But weekends on campus usually revolved around parties and social events. More often than not, I'd wake up on a Saturday morning only to find that every single person had flaked on a trip we'd been planning for weeks. Sure, it stung. I felt the disappointment deep in my gut. But I didn't sulk. I didn't stop inviting people either. I just decided to go it alone whenever the stress built up too high. At first, it felt off, lonely even. Those early solo hikes didn't carry the same joy as the group ones had. But something shifted over time. I started to crave the solitude. I started to need it. The hush of the forest, the absence of voices. It grew on me. On weekends, the trails still buzzed with the usual crowds, but I'd occasionally take off on weekdays, venturing deep into the wilderness where not another soul could be seen. On those days, it truly felt like I'd stepped into a world long abandoned, a ghost planet. That eerie stillness, that absolute quiet. It became addicting. College life was a storm of noise and social obligation. And out there, in the wild, I found my silence. It healed me. But everything changed, intensified even, when I first wandered into the Redwood State Parks. That's where my casual obsessions turned into something more primal. Because that's where I first stood, breath caught in my throat before a coastal redwood. Try to picture it. A tree so tall, you have to crane your neck so far back. Your spine aches. A giant so vast that when you're surrounded by a cluster of them, it feels like you've shrunk. That's the coastal redwood. They are the tallest life forms on Earth. Most of them reach heights of 300 to 350 feet. Some of their trunks stretch over 20 feet across. I'm not being dramatic when I say they're colossal, monumental in a way that bends your understanding of time and scale. And ancient. So ancient. Scientists believe some of them have stood in place for over 2 millennia, silent sentinels rooted in prehistoric soil. Walking among them felt alien, surreal, like I'd left Earth behind. As someone who didn't grow up with these giants, it was like discovering a new religion. Eventually, I was making pilgrimages to the forests near Mendocino 3 or 4 times a month. I'd drive out on a Friday, spend 2 nights camping deep in the woods, and make it back to the city just in time for my Monday lectures. Of course, during my final year of college, and later during the job hunt, I couldn't keep up that pace. But whenever I could, I returned to the redwoods. They became my temple, my gym, and my therapy, all rolled into one. By my late 20s, I'd hiked through Del Norte Coast, Jedediah Smith, and Prairie Creek State Parks 100 times each, if not more. I didn't know every inch of those woods, not like some old ranger might, but I'd gotten close. I could walk through those towering forests with certainty in my step and calm in my chest. I was confident, maybe too confident. I knew how to camp, how to survive, how to handle myself out there. And I believed, with all my seasoned certainty, that I had seen everything those woods could show me. But in 1996, during one seemingly ordinary weekend hike, the forest proved me wrong. Brutally, completely, and in the most horrifying way imaginable. By the summer of '96, those Mendocino woods felt almost like a second home. I'd been wandering through them for close to 6 years by then, testing my limits, mapping out mental trails where no official ones existed. One afternoon, after a chance encounter with a homeowner who lived near the Willets and Three Chop Roads by the Noyo River, things changed for the better. He offered to let me park my car outside his place whenever I needed. It was a simple country home, nothing fancy, but it sat right on the edge of civilization's last breath before the redwoods swallowed everything. With that one gesture, I suddenly had direct access to the deep woods. And when I say deep, I mean the kind of wilderness that swallows you whole without a second thought. Sometimes I'd wind up 3 or 4 miles off the nearest marked trail, 20 miles from the closest highway. Out there, the silence was a living thing, heavy and watchful. And yeah, hiking alone in those stretches was risky. If something went wrong, help wasn't just far. It was practically non-existent. But that danger became part of the allure. I got hooked on the sensation of being absolutely cut off from the rest of the world. If I didn't feel like the last human walking an ancient earth, the hike didn't feel worth it. Even the physical grind became part of this strange spiritual ritual. My job, my deadlines, my day-to-day anxieties, they all evaporated when I stepped beneath those towering giants. Late June of '96, I started another weekend trek from my friend's property, following a route I'd taken maybe half a dozen times before. The first leg of the journey was familiar enough, passing a few campgrounds, a couple of trailheads. But by mile 10, the forest changed. Everything grew quieter, wilder, untouched. Sometimes I'd convince myself that the soil beneath my boots hadn't known another footprint for centuries, maybe even millennia. There were spots so remote that even the ancestral lands of the local tribes had never included them. These areas felt ageless, primordial, older than memory itself. And that was the thrill, that feeling of stepping into a world that didn't need you and didn't care if you vanished inside it. Usually I'd burn out around mile 15. But that June, something drove me deeper. Maybe pride, maybe obsession. I pushed myself a full 18 miles into the backcountry before my legs finally gave out. It felt good, better than good, to set a new personal record. I made camp, ate a little food, and went through my usual routine, wiping down with those miracle-working wet wipes, having a smoke, then crashing in my tent. The next morning, I forced down a couple of power bars and broke down my camp. The extra miles into the forest had been worth every aching step. But now, I had to face the reality of getting myself back to the car before the dinner hour passed me by. I hiked for 4 or 5 hours, grabbed a quick lunch, then pushed onward, head down, focusing on the trail ahead or the bouncing needle of my compass. And then, for no real reason at all, I looked up. What I saw didn't make sense. Not for the redwoods, not for any forest I'd ever walked. The redwoods aren't alone out there. You see Douglas firs, western hemlocks, spruces, and scattered between them, clusters of tan oaks, the locals call them. But these were wrong. 5 or 6 tan oaks stood ahead of me, each one leaning at a sharp angle, 60, maybe 80 degrees, like something had shoved them, bent them, forced them to grow sideways. I'd never seen anything like it. Not once, not in 6 years of wandering those woods. And the moment my brain tried to make sense of it, a cold, uneasy prickle crept up my spine. Now, leaning trees aren't unheard of in dense forests. Vegetation competes for space and light. But what made me stop cold was the way these tan oaks all slanted inward, as if drawn to a single point. They weren't just growing crooked, they were converging, almost deliberately. It looked like the skeletal frame of a giant, forgotten teepee, not man-made exactly, but deliberate, like nature had followed a blueprint no human ever drew. And then I looked up. High above, the tree's branches had tangled together into a thick, knotted canopy. The foliage wove itself into something solid, an almost impenetrable mass of green. Leaves twisted around branches into trunks. It was like a roof, a ceiling. And whatever it was, it hadn't been made by human hands. I froze there, staring, not sure what the hell I was looking at. It didn't feel right. The word nest popped into my mind. Or maybe den. Whatever it was, it wasn't made for us. Not for people. It looked too wild, too alien. But curiosity pulled me forward, step by cautious step. The forest was quiet, eerily so. And I assumed whatever had built that thing wasn't home. I moved toward it, slow and easy, my boots crunching softly over twigs and leaves. Then came the sound. It stopped me dead. It came from the nest. No mistaking that. That thick, tangled clump of branches 30 meters above me. The noise was sharp and hollow, like someone tapping a thick stick against a pipe. Tut-tut-tok, not fast, but loud, echoing, like it wanted me to hear it. My body locked up, every hair on my arms and neck stood at attention. Something was inside that thing. I couldn't see it, but I knew, I felt it. My brain scrambled for answers. The only thing big enough to live up there, in a nest like that, was a bear. Maybe a black bear, unusually talented at climbing. Maybe she'd found the perfect convergence of trees and made it her home. Maybe she had cubs, and maybe she was banging on something with her claws to warn me off. That's what I told myself. I stood perfectly still. Not even a breath moved my chest. The forest around me held its breath too. After what felt like a minute, or maybe it was just 30 seconds, the tapping stopped. Silence. I slowly began to back away, step by measured step. My eyes stayed locked on that mass of foliage above me, waiting for any movement, any flicker of shadow. I'd taken maybe 3 slow paces when it came again. Tok, louder this time, still that hollow echo, still from inside the nest. It didn't repeat the rhythm like before, just one loud knock. But it was enough. I knew now that something was watching me, something that didn't want me too close, something that maybe didn't want me there at all. I didn't run. You never run from a bear, not in the woods, not if you want to live. And besides, if it wasn't a bear, if it was something else, something with instincts less predictable, then running might be the worst thing I could do. So I didn't. I just kept backing away, slow and careful, eyes locked on that nest. I didn't look away, not once, not until I was maybe 50 meters from the thing. Only then did I allow myself to turn around and walk a little faster, though every couple of seconds I flicked my head over my shoulder. Nothing climbed down. The trees held still. No more knocks echoed through the woods. But then I heard it. A different sound this time. A low groaning creak, like old wood straining under pressure. A sound you hear in the moments before a tree topples. Deep and brittle. It came from behind me, back near that nest. And then, layered over it, the rustling began. Up high, right where the nest was. And I stopped walking. Cold fear sank into my chest like a knife. I spun around on instinct, half expecting to see a black bear thundering through the trees, charging straight for me. But what I saw instead, there are no words that could ever fully capture it. The tan oaks, the same ones that had stood like crooked sentinels, they were moving. Not all at once, but in a slow, deliberate rhythm. One by one, they rose, pulled upward from the forest floor, as if some invisible hand was plucking them out like weeds. Thick, tangled roots emerged with them, dripping earth like hair wet from a swamp. And then, just as slowly, they sank back down, the dirt sighing softly as it closed around them again. My mind short-circuited. I blinked hard, over and over, trying to force the impossible away. But it didn't stop. The trees kept rising, falling, breathing. They weren't just leaning now. They were bending. Their trunks arched and twisted in ways no living tree should be able to. It was like watching bones flex around joints that didn't exist. And overhead, the canopy, the dense mass of tangled green, began to lower. The whole forest moved in silence. No cracking limbs, no splintering wood, just a soft rustling hush, like 1,000 dry voices whispering all at once. It was the sound of leaves dragging over bark, branches rubbing against each other like skin. It was the sound of something old and very much alive. And then I saw it. Or maybe I understood it. This wasn't 5 or 6 separate trees. It wasn't a grove or a cluster or even a freak accident of nature. It was one thing, one monstrous living organism, disguising itself as a gathering of trees. And those trunks? They weren't trunks at all. They were legs. My legs wouldn't move. My brain screamed at them. But they stayed rooted, locked in place by a paralyzing full-body confusion. I didn't know how long I stood there. A second? Two? Maybe less. But in that breath of time, I knew, absolutely knew, that I wasn't looking at a forest anymore. I was looking at a body, a towering silent thing, waking up. And I ran. I didn't think. I didn't choose. I just turned and ran. My boots pounded the earth as adrenaline exploded through every inch of me. I ran like the forest was on fire, like the devil himself was chasing me. It was the first and only time in my life I've ever known what real animal terror feels like. That kind of terror that grips your heart with both hands and screams move or die. My pack, easily 40, maybe 50 pounds, slammed into my back with every step. The straps cut deep into my shoulders, burning hot. Twigs slashed at my face, roots caught at my boots. Rocks shifted beneath me. I stumbled, I crashed. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I don't know how far I ran, maybe half a mile, maybe more. My lungs felt like they were tearing open. My thighs screamed. My calves cramped so hard, I thought they might tear themselves loose. But I kept going. Blurred shapes of trees whipped past me. The world became a chaotic smear of green and brown. I fell once, hard. The breath knocked out of me. But I scrambled up again, blood roaring in my ears, and kept running. The pain didn't matter. My body wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the fear. And still, I didn't stop. Not until my stomach began to clench, twisting into sick knots. My chest heaved like I'd been punched again and again, and a dark tunnel began to close in around my vision. And finally, my body gave out. My legs buckled. My steps turned sluggish, then uneven. My knees quivered like jelly, and I could feel it rising. Nausea, sharp and cold, climbing up my throat like a second heartbeat. I staggered to a halt, bent double with my hands on my knees, and vomited until my stomach clawed itself empty. The world pitched and spun around me. Strings of spit and sour bile clung to my lips as I sucked in ragged breaths, the weight of my pack crushing down on my shoulders like a boulder. When the retching finally eased and I managed to lift my head, I saw nothing behind me. Just still trees and empty forest. And God, the relief that washed over me. It nearly buckled my legs again. A wave of calm so sudden it felt unreal. But I didn't truly allow myself to breathe until I reached my car. I didn't look for the couple who let me park on their property. They were inside, lights off, and it was pushing 9 p.m. by then. I wasn't in any state to talk. I'd spent the last miles whipping my head over my shoulder every few steps, desperate to see nothing chasing me. The drive home passed in near silence. I put on some talk radio just to drown out my own thoughts. But it barely helped. The moment I stepped through my front door, peeled off my clothes, and showered, the fear crept back in. I kept running the scene over and over in my head until thinking turned into drinking, and drinking turned into staring into the dark, wondering if I was losing my mind. Because here's the thing, I knew no one would believe me, not a single damn soul. But that wasn't the part that scared me. What terrified me, down in the marrow of my bones, was the idea that my brain had finally snapped. That what I'd seen wasn't real, but some symptom of a deeper growing sickness I hadn't noticed until now. The next morning at work, I called my doctor's office. My co-workers gave me sideways looks. I wasn't acting like myself, but I brushed them off, said I wasn't feeling great, told them I had an appointment. 3 days later, I sat in my doctor's office, knees bouncing, sweat cold on my palms. When she finally asked what brought me in, I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. It took me far longer than I expected to force out the words. I think I'm seeing things. She didn't laugh, didn't give me that raised eyebrow or the tight little smile. Instead, she nodded and calmly asked me to describe exactly what was happening. Something about her steady voice loosened the knot in my throat, and I told her everything. The trees, the nest, the legs, every horrifying detail. She ran neurological tests, asked about my sleep, my stress, what medications I was on, whether my family had any history of psychosis. I told her I hadn't slept great that weekend, but otherwise I felt fine. No meds, no family issues. Nothing that sounded like the start of a mental breakdown. I expected her to refer me to a specialist, or at least schedule me for a brain scan. But she didn't. Instead, she told me I was healthy. Exhaustion, dehydration, stress. Any combination of those things could have caused a hallucination. Maybe even a vivid one. She said not to worry unless it happened again. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. Because her words didn't erase the memory. They didn't soften the sound of those hollow thumps echoing from the canopy, or the uncanny stretching of wood twisting where no branches should bend, or the near silent rise and fall of those legs pretending to be trees. I remembered it too clearly, too viscerally. Hours later, I realized I felt no comfort at all. Because if I wasn't hallucinating, if my mind wasn't broken, then what the hell was that thing? By 1997, believe it or not, I'd managed to get my hands on a computer with access to something new. The internet. The internet was barely a shadow of what it is today. But even in those early days, bless Alta Vista and its clunky magic, there were places to search, strange little corners of the web where forgotten knowledge seemed to cling like cobwebs. Forums, message boards, proto-search engines. I dove into all of them, clawing through their outdated pages like a desperate man digging through ash. Delphi's paranormal section became my first stop. I found others there. People who had seen things, felt things, experienced the inexplicable, and were brave or broken enough to write about it. Then there was RPG.net, where strange stories sometimes crept in between game talk and fan theories. And of course, cryptid databases, half myth, half hope, collections of articles on creatures that straddled the line between folklore and possible truth. But it was a place called the Well that finally gave me something that felt real. It wasn't free. You had to pay to access it, but that actually improved the quality. It filtered out the noise. No teenagers inventing stories for kicks. No delusional rantings about reptilian governments or alien abductions involving backyard probes. The Well attracted the meticulous, the obsessed maybe, but also the thoughtful. You might call them super nerds. I called them salvation. And tucked inside its structured labyrinth was the Cryptozoology Forum, a serious one. Unlike Usenet's cesspools of flying saucer garbage and incoherent rants, the Well's users brought science to their speculation. Posts discussed Bigfoot in evolutionary terms. One thread laid out theories on bipedal hominids crossing the Bering Land Bridge, only to be wiped out by climate and competition. One user argued that, in theory, dense forests, especially those in the Pacific Northwest, might hide a tiny population of unknown primates. But no DNA, no bones, no hard proof. Most agreed. Fascinating, but unlikely. That level-headed skepticism is what made me trust them. And then, deep in the archives, after hours of hunched scrolling, I found it. A post from a deleted user. What he described matched what I'd seen in those woods. Almost exactly. The leaning trees, the interwoven canopy, the slow, unnatural movement, the paralysis, the blinding terror. He too had fled through the forest, heart pounding, lungs burning. The creatures, hadn't pursued him. They hadn't even reacted. But just seeing them had nearly broken him. He asked, "Has anyone else seen this?" Most replies were polite disbelief. A few mocked him. But one, only one, hit me like a punch to the gut. It was from someone who claimed they'd witnessed a massive insectoid entity. Something like a stick insect, but on a scale that defied imagination. It didn't stand out, it blended in. Like a moth the color of bark, it disguised itself among trunks and leaves. You'd never spot it unless it moved, or unless you were already watching. He explained it in terms of natural camouflage, how cuttlefish, chameleons, even leaf-mimic insects disappear in plain sight. What we'd seen, he said, wasn't supernatural. It was biological, a real living part of the world, just one we hadn't classified yet. Something colossal, something ancient, and something hiding in plain sight. I had to reach out. His reply had been posted nearly 6 months earlier, so I wasn't sure he'd respond. But I messaged him anyway, wrote out the whole thing, everything I'd seen, felt, feared. To my shock, he replied just days later. He lived in San Francisco. He invited me over, said he wanted to hear everything in person, that we could compare notes, swap terror like trading cards. Just the idea of sitting across from someone who wouldn't think I was insane, that was reason enough. So I packed a bag, drove back up to the city, checked into a cheap motel off Geary, and the next afternoon, I went to meet the man who had seen the same thing I had. Or maybe something even worse. His emails had been clean, articulate, almost polished. So I walked into that meeting expecting, well, maybe not a scientist, but at least someone grounded. Someone who'd seen what I'd seen and could help me make sense of it. Instead, what opened the apartment door was a man who looked as though the world had chewed him up and spit him out a long time ago. Wild, greasy hair, a stained vest that might once have been white, a smell that punched me in the face, old sweat, mildew, and something sour I didn't want to identify. His apartment was worse. The air felt thick, like it hadn't been opened to daylight in years. There were piles of newspapers, stacks of junk, plates crusted with God knows what. It was the sort of place you instinctively breathe shallow in, afraid you'll inhale something alive. But I stayed, because I was drowning, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he had the rope. It took only minutes to see he didn't, to see he'd never had one. He launched into wild tangents, conspiracies, patterns only he could see, strings of half-insane theories connecting creatures in the woods with government surveillance, ancient civilizations, and, you guessed it, aliens. But I gritted my teeth and waited, hoping we'd get to the part that mattered. Then he said it. Said he could communicate with the giant stick creature. Said he was in contact with it. Said it trusted him. And for a very reasonable fee, just a few $1,000, he could lead me to it. Arrange a meeting, he said, like he was some back alley talent agent representing a monster. That's when the fury hit me. Hot, sharp, immediate. I actually felt my fist tighten. I wanted to punch him, shatter that smug little grin he wore while trying to manipulate someone desperate. But I was standing in a deranged stranger's dim, filthy apartment, and logic clawed its way back into my brain. Don't piss off the lunatic while you're trapped inside his home. So I forced a polite smile, forced a thank you, forced my voice not to shake. I told him I had to leave. He tried to swap numbers. I gave him a fake one and wished him a good afternoon with every ounce of self-control I had. When I stepped out of that building, the air outside felt clean, sharp. My anger burned away, replaced by something worse. Shame, humiliation, bone-deep disappointment. How could I have been so naive, so ready to believe someone, anyone, could make sense of the impossible with me? I drove south towards San Jose, and somewhere along the highway, it hit me like a gut punch. I was spiraling. The fear, the obsession, the need for validation, they were eating me alive. I imagined myself in 10 years, 20, 40, some hermit living in a shanty deep in the woods, muttering to himself about monsters while his life rotted away. I saw myself becoming him. That man in the filthy vest, that cautionary tale. I saw my future shrinking down to one memory, the thing in the forest, until it swallowed everything else. My job, my friendships, my sanity. I pictured trying to tell someone, really tell them, and watching the smirk curl on their lips, the patronizing nod, the slow, cautious retreat, the unspoken, should we be worried about him? Is he unstable? And under all that, the truth kept circling. I couldn't lie about what I'd seen. I couldn't forget it, couldn't bury it, couldn't pretend it never happened. So I carried it, day after day, and it wore me down. Over the years, I've built something resembling a normal life, a job, relationships, routines. But the memory sits like a stone lodged beneath my ribs. Some days heavier, some days quiet, but never gone. The anxiety feeds the frustration. The frustration feeds the anxiety. It cycles until I can't even tell who I'm angry at anymore. The creature, the world that refuses to believe me, or myself for still being haunted by it. And now, coming full circle, maybe you understand why sleep is such a battle, why medication became a crutch, why drifting off naturally, even for an hour, feels like a blessing. It's been a long, long time since I felt anything close to peace. But voices like yours, these stories, these channels, they give me a few brief moments of silence, a little bit of stillness in the chaos. And for the first time in years, my mind feels just a little less haunted.